Yeah, her experience is so illustrious. She's achieved so many things, and also on the data center and infrastructure space where you don't see many women. It's amazing how far you have come. Yeah, and I have to give you a special word of appreciation for that. So my first question is to Seema. So on the infrastructure side, you've been seeing how how the growth has happened, and where growth will come with challenges, right? So in terms of handling those workloads, where do you see the bottlenecks are, and how are you managing them?
Thank you so much, Geeta. Good afternoon. So let me begin by saying there's been an explosion. I'm sure all of you agree with me that there's an explosion, at least a rapid capacity needs to be brought online, right? That's the biggest challenge, and there are so many underlying challenges to bring that capacity online. The first and foremost is the construction bottleneck. I don't know how many of you agree with me. We are facing massive construction, bottleneck. There are so many parallel constructions. It starts right from land to getting permits, to getting people of quality who can translate the design into a great piece of monument architecture for our digital infrastructure. So that's where it begins. That's the first one that we are facing. And we are trying to see how to address that. You know, being one of the best engineering companies, even from our years of 85 years of experience, we face it in huge quantum right now. The second thing is the power. Going from a moderate and a regular, or whatever you call it, like a conventional cooling to a hybrid cooling and to a ultra high density, we are facing a whole lot of challenges. I'm sure in this region, all of you will agree with me, our adiabatic itself, temperatures itself are not very great. You have to come up with some really good, cooling to be able to. So that's the second bottleneck. And the third related to that is your supply chain. I find it really hard to believe. It doesn't matter. People want everything once they sign the contract in 18 to 24 months. But the supply chain is definitely not keeping pace. So that's the third bottleneck. The fourth one is on the network side, which we never had before. So some of the applications, what I'm seeing on the AI, let me give you an example, whether it's financial analytics or say medication, like geomedication. So both of these require a very ultra high, low latency networks. And you find a place, you find everything conducive to build, the next thing that you face is the network issue. So I think all of us need to look at low latency, east-west traffic, how to handle efficiently for AI, which we are not used to in conventional, we are not used to it. And fourth is also the energy issues, like how do you really moderate, how do you optimize energy problems. On one side you have power challenges, on the other side you have the energy challenges and making them efficient. So I think, and the last but not the least is the stability of the networks. So I think there are 4 or 5, I want to keep it simple, I want my colleagues also to elaborate on this. Starts with construction, then on to power, then finding a solution for low latency networks, then of course we have to look at how to bridge the current gap from the energy optimization perspective and bring value to customer, and finally find the stability network. So all of these are currently, I don't think we have solved the problem, but we definitely see some way of, some way of kind of getting around it. We're doing a good job getting around it at this moment.
I think you have summarized it so nicely. Anything else that she's missed, would you like to add?
What a comprehensive list. That was
Yeah.
I think just one thing, the other pressure that brings on is human capital. So we can scale infrastructure, we can scale manufacture. Scaling humans has a 9-month delay from the signal to when they come. So that's another area, and that's at all aspects, not just in construction, but if you're going to leverage AI, you need people that have familiarity with that technology. That's a small set of people today. There's a lot of people leaning in to be educated in that area, but we have significant gaps in that area. I guess the other piece of pressure that we see is we want all this capacity, but we want perfect sustainability at the same time as well. And so it's a pressure point.
Varun, anything from your side?
Yeah, I think really good job in terms of capturing all the various factors. But the thing about bottlenecks is that usually there's one bottleneck, and then you de-bottleneck it, and then you move to the next bottleneck, right? So among the list that was shared, I feel like the biggest bottleneck is power, because the quality of power and the time that it takes to create power, particularly for AI, there's quite a bit of limitations in the region. So today I'd say markets like Melbourne, Mumbai, Johor, to some extent Tokyo have figured it out in terms of providing power in the next, call it 3 to 5 years. But for Asia to be truly capturing the benefits of AI and the potential of AI, that's not enough. Those markets have to grow, and then other markets of similar nature have to come in. Several 1+ gigawatt markets is the need. So I do see that the core bottleneck for me is energy, but certainly everything from network to human capital. I would argue, Dave, that it takes more than 9 months because you've got to teach them how to walk, but even that is certainly a bottleneck.
Right. Ken,
So yeah, I think you all summarized it really well, so I'm not sure what else I can add on top, but maybe I'll just kind of elaborate that end of the day, it's about demand and supply. So the facility providers, the data center providers, if they're providing a set of services, whether it's network services or racks and space and all that, it's important to think about where matching your supply with the demand. And the challenges for cloud providers like us is that oftentimes we can't, without adequate data, we cannot predict the demand and when it spikes. Right? For example, if you guys are shopping a lot online, you'll notice that a lot of live commerce companies or e-commerce companies, they would like to run certain promotions on, say, 10th of October or 11th of November, for example. So this 10-10, 9-9, 11-11 sort of events, you see a huge spike, right? So the opportunity and the challenge, of course, is how do we make sure that when the workload spikes, that we have adequate supply to meet those demands without overheating, without undersupplying. And it all goes back to what our friend said, do we have enough manpower to support it? Do we have enough good energy? I think that's a good word to describe. Energy comes in different forms and shapes. So there are good energy sources, there are bad energy sources. And so how do we make sure that the demand side and the supply side are being matched together? And that's where the power of AI comes in. And ultimately, the quality of your AI is also very much dependent on the quality of your data that you are able to gather and harness and train. So it's a work in progress, but I think I just wanted to add the demand supply side equation is important to consider holistically.
Right. Thanks for bringing the data component. We'll come back to that. I'll go to David now because I have a question for you on handling AI workloads which demand faster and more scalable infrastructure. My question is, should we rethink the design of data centers to manage this?
Yeah, so we're very much at a tipping point with the exponential growth of artificial intelligence and it driving a new type of processor architecture into our data centers. So our traditional partners, Intel, AMD, ARM, every generation that they come out with, maybe 10, 15% more power requirement. When we look at GPUs that power AI, they're already starting at 10 times that power. And what we're seeing is an exponential increase in power generation by generation. And so essentially they've broken the monopoly inside the data center, and now we're re-architecting data centers to meet that requirement. And we're not quite sure where that requirement will end. What we do know is we're pushing the edge of air cooling with today's generation. We know the next generation will require liquid cooling, and then beyond that we may require immersion cooling. All of those are huge challenges to data centers. The real estate is not designed to be re-articulated for these changes. So there's a lot of talk about the future and how we're going to architect for the future, and that's still quite uncertain about what form factors are going to win, how we're going to standardize, what other players other than NVIDIA are going to come into the market, and how will they impact the specifications. But today, Microsoft still has 325 data centers that are operating already. We can't retrofit all of them to these new standards. So we're in this transition period. And I guess the other thing is, and back to Ken's point on data, GPU doesn't live in a vacuum by itself. It's great to be able to send something there, get some inferencing and get something back, but in general, you need to authenticate against something to identify who you are. You want to provide some data to that AI. You may want to push notifications back to say, hey, your response is ready. It doesn't work by itself, so it actually needs access to a whole range of other services. And so we need to find this hybrid world where we can provide things like Azure, all of the services that it encompass, and then use that to surround you and make it useful and usable by customers.
Right. Now, you mentioned one point that you have like 325 data centers and you cannot retrofit everything, right? So it's and not everybody needs AI grade data centers. That's the fact, right? People just want to ride the hype, and but my observation is that you don't need that kind of capacity in all cases. But now my question to Varun is slightly along those lines. Like, so there has to be a delicate balance between where do you invest, right? Is really this kind of investment needed for the demand, or is it just the hype? How do you make these decisions, and what's your advice on that?
So in general, when you're making decisions under uncertainty, you don't want to get things wrong. It's hard to get things right, and I don't think what you want to do is have a crystal ball and say this is what's going to happen. You should plan for a range of outcomes and ensure that you're not getting it completely wrong, right? So if you think about a normal curve, try to be in the middle of the normal curve. Don't be like the highest density ever. Like yesterday, there was an industry dinner. Someone was saying all our data centers should be 5,000 kilogram per square meter. No, absolutely not. You'll have a lot of capacity that's not going to be useful for a lot, and there'll be a lot of embedded carbon and steel in that. At the same time, you're not going to build, your grandfather's data center, right? So you got to be in the middle of that. And to Dave's point, think of this as a fleet of ships, right? And the entire fleet has to move. And they're not going to move all together. It's going to take time. We've gone through a similar transition in this industry before, when we moved from your standard commercial internet data centers to cloud. There was a time when we retrofitted, like telco hotels to have cloud capacity in them, and then we were saying, oh, how will we do 8 kilowatt? This is designed for 2.5 kilowatt, right? So we've gone through that transition. This transition is many degrees of magnitude more complex and challenging, but some of the learnings from that transition, which is that several different forms of data centers will exist in the fleet, and many of them will take some time to turn this right direction. And you need to plan for every part of the journey, not just for the end point of the journey. So just to summarize all of that, I would say that we should not throw out the old. We need to invest in the new, but we need to find ways in which the old has a role to play, because that's where the building is, the power is, the capacity is. So right now, all of us, including PDG, we're building a gigawatt of capacity. A large proportion of that is latest and new. But the next step would be acquiring older data centers, transforming them like we did with telco hotels. Do that with cloud data centers as well. And I think that's a very exciting opportunity for capital, for business, as well as for customers in the future.
Yeah. Please.
I just want to add to what you said, but let me just pose a question to people here, right? You really need to start thinking on this. We talk of the right product. There's nothing like an AI DC, pure AI DC, because see what happens is the amount of the terrace space required for cooling an AI-centric data center, which is ultra-high density, is very large one required, compared to a traditional data center. Just imagine the amount of space required to host the same set of racks, 30 megawatt of racks for AI. The form factor is much smaller. So how do you really build this? It should look like a ship. Can you just imagine? It's quite difficult to do that. So when you talk of a product, now we are all trying the two problems to solve. Is the engineering keeping in pace with us, with the innovation that's needed? Two, how does the civil engineering look at that? How can you really make it efficient? And I'll give you typical examples. Places like Indonesia, India, where the land is so, you don't really get it easily, it's expensive, and it's a whole lot of stuff. You have to strike balance between so many things: space, land cost, energy cost, efficiency cost, a whole lot of that. And I think for some time, in the next whatever 2 to 3 years, we'll continue to see hybrid products. We are not going to see this or that. And I want to be proven wrong.
Thank you for that. So, yeah, thank you, Seema, for that. So, yeah, Ken, my question to you is, like we all know that AI comes with, the challenges in terms of scalability and resource management. How can you use AI itself to mitigate these?
So, back to what I mentioned just now, right? Understanding the demand curve and the supply curve is extremely important. Now, let me talk a bit about the demand side of the house, right? Some examples. You have spikes, for example, from time to time. I gave an example about e-commerce companies running different programs and different promotions. You have situations, for example, the banks, they may need to prepare for certain spikes during certain hours of the day when people are off work and they're trying to do their transaction. So you see a spike, for example. There may be instances that some other industries, for example, healthcare, during COVID-19, for example, you may have certain instances where there's a lot more people trying to use certain apps to go into buildings and trace together, that sort of stuff. So everything is, the data is being stored on the cloud, and therefore the spike in demand is important in terms of how the supply curve can actually meet the demand curve. Okay, so traditionally it's a bit of a trial and error. Traditionally and historically, a lot of players, hyperscalers in general, historically would just say, okay, we see these patterns maybe over the last 12 months, we'll just buy a ton of servers. We buy a ton of servers and we then also prepare for potential spikes by preparing ourselves by buying more power during certain periods. Now, unless we actually come up with a highly clean and predictive model, then everything becomes a bit of a manual guess in terms of how capacity demand and how supply can meet each other. Now with AI, the game is changing, right? And AI is still at its infancy, but today we have a lot of companies are coming up with different models to drive things like predictive maintenance. So you know that, for example, there's a certain spike, you know that at a certain time of the year, or certain time of the month, or certain time of the day, you need extra attention, right? You need to have much more attention in terms of the capacity, in terms of how workloads, for example, how data being stored on one kind of storage are being moved to another kind of storage. You know that that pattern is happening because historically you have some of these data. So if you can build enough and sufficient intelligence onto an AI model, then you can actually drive a better supply curve. And now moving to the supply curve, what are we talking about? We're talking about, is there a better way to manage the power, the cooling? Is there a better way to manage your energy consumption? Is there a better way to manage your network bandwidth usage? Is there a better way to manage security, right? Security comes in different forms and shapes. It could be physical security, it could be digital security, right? And these days we know that data centers are under constant attack from bad actors. So is there a better way to manage the security environment? Is there a better way to manage the stability of the data center? Is there a better way to manage the scalability of the data center? So again, back to what I mentioned just now, if we have sufficient data to train the model based on the demand patterns, we can then train and drive the right behaviors powered by AI on the supply side. And as a hyperscaler, and we are very concerned about profitability because we don't want to be, we work with a lot of these folks here. We invest in data centers, we invest in our storage, in our servers, in our compute. But we are constantly worried about overinvestment. We are constantly worried also about underinvestment, right? If we put too much servers, like, oh my goodness, we are making a loss next month, right? So how do we quickly address that? We remove a lot of servers. If we don't have enough data, then this whole supply and demand just goes out of sync. And that's historically a challenge that we're facing. So what we're driving internally, and again, this is not just peculiar to Tencent but across the industry, is how does hyperscaler drive a more efficient and effective business model by taking advantage of AI to drive a better demand and supply outcomes. Yeah, so I think that's important. Again, something that I have had constant conversation with, for example, with Arun. How do we make sure that when we invest in the data center facility, that we are also meeting the demand side of the house? The demand and supply, very important to look at it holistically. And of course, the opportunity is AI is now changing the game because it's giving us the opportunity to train the model. It's not perfect, but we're moving there.
Thank you for that. You've actually set the stage for my next question to Varun. So it is this, that as dynamic resource allocation becomes more critical, how do you strike a balance between over-provisioning and meeting real-time requirements, especially for running large machine learning models?
If I had the answer to that, I would be sitting. But jokes apart, I think Ken made this point, and I'm sure Dave has the same experience as well, which is demand planning in a complex environment where you have AI workloads, where you have cloud workloads, where you have first-party workloads, third-party workloads. All the combination of that is super challenging. So I think you need to make, my simple answer is you need to make a choice. Ken mentioned two scenarios. One is where you are in overcapacity, in which case you are less profitable, or you have undercapacity, in which case you're losing opportunity. I think the choice, and I sell data center services, so I will say this, the choice is to have overcapacity, because it's a physical limitation of having that capacity. If you don't have it, you lose it, right? So I think hedging, optionality, and working with your friendly neighborhood data center provider so that you have that overcapacity, but you reduce the cost of that overcapacity, right? The impact of profitability, you have the ability to expand, you have the ability to be fungible on your capacity between markets, between sites, between workloads or use cases is super important. A lot of that is actually happening in industry right now. We don't necessarily talk about it in public because some of it is privileged information that is tied to customer engagements that for obvious reasons you can't talk about. But I think there is a lot more that can be done, and that's for me is the opportunity. So A, over provision if you have to. B, find ways to hedge and build optionality so that you can reduce the cost of over provisioning. That's how I would say.
That's a very honest answer. Thank you for that. I didn't expect that. Thank you. So yeah, the follow-up question to Dave. Follow-up question to David is, with edge computing becoming more relevant in handling AI workloads, how do you envision the evolution of network infrastructure to decentralize AI processing while you are maintaining the speed and reliability, etc.?
Wow, what a question. First we have to go backwards to look forward. So when we look at the growth in cloud, we need to remember that today that's a centralized model. So essentially all those on-premise data centers, all of that infrastructure that was in closets under people's desks. The first wave, we consolidated those. And then in the second wave, enterprise and startup businesses alike began leveraging not just the capacity, but the capabilities that come with cloud. And one of the things, back to that supply-demand model, one of the things that kills customer trust faster than anything else is going to deploy and being unsuccessful. So I'm aligned with you, and we make a strategic decision to over-deploy because our customers' trust is our number one asset. So we never want to break that trust. But it does come at great expense. When we look at the edge, there's been talk for a long time about how we need to bring cloud services to the edge. But if you look at all the hyperscalers, we really haven't done that. And the market hasn't demanded it. So there was talk about autonomous vehicles and other use cases that would require near real-time access to cloud services. And the reality is that's being deployed into the edge. And if you look at AI, I know we talk about these massive high-power GPUs in data centers, but there's a massive investment going into mobile devices, into laptops. We've announced our own Copilot onboard laptops. So we're finding ways to bring these architectures into the small devices that can run dedicated purpose-driven models for those environments. You're not going to deploy ChatGPT onto your mobile phone, but you can deploy a pretty good model that knows about a specific area that you're interested in. And what we find is at the edge, we're not interested in general compute. The edge, it's niche, it's something very specific, and smaller models work well there. So right now, we're actually seeing the mobile market drive that AI evolution at the edge, but it's a very different problem space and a very different set of users and very different problems to what we're solving in the data center. But what I will say is data is the anchor. So you can put things at the edge, but if it needs data, most of that data today is centralized, and that does impact the network. And what we see with AI today is it's mostly stateless still. So you actually send the model the data, it does its work, and it sends you a result. It's very similar to a search in Bing or Google. You don't know where that request goes, you don't know where it's serviced, you don't care. You give it all the information it needs to do its work, and it comes back. That model is sufficient today, but we're not sure that that will be sufficient in the future. Also, when we talk about resilience, so we offer customer SLAs on our cloud services, but we don't offer customer SLAs on Bing searches.
Yeah.
So where does AI sit amongst this? And I think if it's human to human, well, you can deal with a 50 millisecond delay. You can deal with not knowing where that transaction is being processed. But if we're starting to talk about machine to machine, and let's say we have 10 or 15 different AI models that are looking in real time at FPOS transactions, that's a very different prospect. It's going to create a very different network challenge, and they are going to have to share information. So it's not just GPU, it's information sharing, authentication, access to history, being able to escalate and push notifications. So there's this big coupling that's coming. We're not going to have AI sitting over here in a big data center a long way away from where our other services are located. We're going to find that there's going to be more and more pressure to consolidate, aggregate, and make that a seamless experience for our customers.
And not to forget the security and the ethical challenges that come with it. We don't talk about that.
That's a huge part of it, but that's not just true of AI. That's true of any service that you put out into the community. And AI gets a lot of attention at the moment because of the power and the attention cycle that it has. But every service as a provider that we put into the market needs to be responsible, it needs to be secure. Otherwise, you'll have a gateway into your AI, and it doesn't matter how secure you make that if your authentication doesn't work, or if your data is not secure that you're using to work with your AI, you still have a problem. So it's actually a secure ecosystem that's important.
Thank you for that. I have a follow-up question to Seema, because you mentioned GPUs. My question is, what are the alternate technologies? Now, currently, GPUs and TPUs are doing the job.
I'm not a very big expert on, but I do a lot of reading. So what I do believe is, to some extent, GPU, TPU, which are classic models, but then we will have probably some accelerators, which is required for certain use cases and customized, which will come into existence. Quantum also has a very interesting role to play, especially in scientific research, which we are seeing a huge interest in quantum. So that's going to be another alternative. We haven't explored. That's not a commodity yet. So I'm seeing definitely an interest in quantum. The third is there's also some neuromorphic models and things like that, which is very influenced by human brain, I guess. So I was seeing two companies which are doing intense research in trying to bring that, which has huge impact. It reduces the entire energy consumption that's there today. So it's going to disrupt if it really becomes successful. And secondly, the teraflops are like force multiplied. So I think those are some of the things. And what does it entail to data center to provide the infrastructure to support them? I actually don't know. And I think it'll take some time to more and
I love that response, and I look at this evolution with AI and how it's driving data center design, and I think quantum is an excellent example. So most of quantum is done as close to 0 Kelvin as possible. So we think it's hard to cool a data center to 35 degrees. Try cooling a data center to 0 degrees, 7 Kelvin, and see what a power problem you're going to have.
And one last question to Ken, and then we'll take audience Q&A. So Ken, my question is, what are the biggest obstacles in implementing AI-driven resource allocation to data centers, and how can companies navigate these challenges? What's your advice?
So I'll break your question into a few parts. Now, if we look at a data center, what frustrates people, the end consumers who are consuming the service, is the lack of services. Services are down, or it could be a case of data breach, right? Or the data is lost. So nothing frustrates the end user or the users of the services more than these two. And oftentimes you trace it back. Usually it comes in the form of two areas that data center providers fail to address. One is the hardware component, one is the software component. Let me cite two examples. The first one will be on the hardware side. I don't know if you guys remember, there was a case last year in Korea, I won't say who, but one of the largest social communication app was out of service. Why was it out of service? Because there was a fire that broke out. The fire broke out, the whole services got disrupted, it disrupted the entire South Korea. And South Korea is very dependent on the particular app. I wouldn't say who, but you can do your research. The second example I'll cite, which is software. But it's interesting because the software impacted on the hardware. There is and again, I won't say who, but you can do your research. There's a particular financial institution in Singapore that the services were disrupted for many hours because the aircon, the air conditioning, basically didn't do its job, so everything went overheated. But it didn't do its job because there were certain software patches that went wrong. Okay? So now back to your question about legacy data center. Now, if data center providers who claim to be state of the art can have a fire issue, can have an air conditioning and patching issue, what more would legacy providers need to think about? A lot more, of course. So they will need to think about, do I have the right physical infrastructure to support an AI implementation? Do I have, let alone a cloud or storage implementation? Do I have the right physical infrastructure? Do I have the right power cooling management system in place? Do I have the right software patching in place to manage the environment? So I think these are questions that data center providers need to think about. And again, because the assumption is that because a lot of these legacies data centers are on-premise. They're on-premise. Okay, that's the assumption here. And they've been existing for a long time. Now, if you think about what the fundamentals of AI or AI development requires, AI requires a lot of data. You need to train the data. Where does the data go? It goes into storage. So consequently, you need large capacity in terms of the ability to store these data sets. Now, when you train the model, what are the other ingredients? You need to have servers that you can develop quickly and then spin it up and spin it down quickly, for example. So the capacity, the ability to provide capacity for training, for AI development is also important. So again, back to what I mentioned, the demand and the supply side. So in a typical legacy data center, they oftentimes lack the supply ingredients to manage the environment. On the demand side, oftentimes when they want to develop and build an AI model, they don't have, again, the right supply to support the demand. So again, there's a mismatch of the legacy data center providers in terms of their desire to develop the AI roadmap, which is where hyperscalers comes in. Again, I'm not talking about just Tencent, but across the industries, Microsoft, Tencent, Ali, the hyperscalers, some of the bigger value proposition, of course, would be how do we help some of these players with legacy data centers to be able to move and transition into a world-class data center environment, both on the hardware side, and again, hardware meaning physical, anything physical, as well as the software side, right? And again, if we get the X together, then there's a lot of value that we can add to these legacy players. And again, because the pace of innovation is so fast, if they're thinking that they can do patchwork on their legacy data center, then the challenge, of course, is that the legacy will drag them down, and they won't be able to act fast enough and to bring these AI innovations to the market. Yeah. So again, there's a lot of challenges on legacy players. And that's where hyperscalers and world-class aspiring data center facility providers need to think about how to overcome some of these legacy issues.
You answered this in many levels actually, and as for some levels I think brought a smile to many of these faces. So maybe we should ask if anyone has questions. We can take one or two questions in the interest of time. Any questions from the audience? I'm sure everybody agreed because you, yeah? Yes, please.
Thanks, Geeta. My name is Ibrahim Kocagöz. I'm Engineering Solutions Director from PCS Thailand. Gordon, actually, I can ask you the question, since you have got several data centers in different countries. In terms of infrastructure and application of the AI or digital services, which country you see one of the top strongest and easy to implement?
Hi, Brian. Thanks for the question. So the way I see this right now is at the highest level, there's a regulatory concern, challenge, or consideration for our hyperscaler customers. From what I understand, they can speak for themselves, but just from what I understand, the workloads that are being deployed right now are for global GPU coverage, not for specific country, not sovereign AI, therefore serving the globe. And therefore, countries which have a regulatory environment that is either amenable to AI or at least not inimical to AI, right, definitely have a leg up. So that's one. Second is the quality of power, and the extent of power is the second big one. And the third is existing supply and roadmap for supply. So if you apply these three levers and look at the markets in Asia right now, Australia comes very high in that because obviously all three it does well. I'd say India does pretty well as well on that. Malaysia, particularly Johor, has been doing extremely well. So I think those three markets have a lead today in the first wave, but the second wave, if you believe all that we are saying, is going to be so much bigger that is not insurmountable, right? So it gives an important step going into the next phase, but for Bangkok, Thailand, for Indonesia, Jakarta, or for other markets, there is an opportunity by solving for these three things. The hyperscalers themselves are engaging with governments to solve the first. They're always talking to them about trusted data agreements, about access to AI information, etc. And the other two, the utilities are working on it and the data center operators are working on it. So I think there is a big opportunity for all the other markets. But I would say today, to answer your specific question, those three markets, in my view, are ahead at this point.
No question.
Hi, my name is Anil Dev. I'm from Klima Management. We are into cooling solutions for data centers. My question is, see, in the Indian context, where as Seema said, land is expensive, DCs are vertically stacked. We are seeing now a 9-level DC coming up, and the terrace space in a hot climate like India is limited. There is going to be an eventual shift, as we all can see, in the liquid. So what happens to the colo DCs, when their customers, their tenants want to migrate from air to liquid, so which could happen, right, in the next 3-4 years' time. So what happens to those DCs and sustainability in terms of, or let's say, the ability of those DCs to evolve or to manage this situation?
So just quick one, there are three strategies. One strategy is you retain, you change nothing. There's going to continue to be cloud workloads, and those cloud workloads have to sit in a data center. There are technology windows, and then there are requirements that you sit there, you have customers you need to serve. So that's one strategy. Second strategy is you intercept, which is data centers which are being built for air cool, you intercept them at the right time and you transform them to liquid cool. And that is happening a lot. Honestly, I had black hair before intercept started, now I have white hair because of all the intercepts that's going on at this point of time. And Klima Veneta is helping us with that. The third is that I'd say is to build new, which is what we're doing right now a lot, right? Which is grounds up, design for the new workload and build for that. So I think a lot of focus is on the third strategy, as it should be, and a lot of us are doing that. But I think the first and the second are also important as we think about the future of the industry. So I don't think it's going to be a 100% shift, killing old data centers. As I was saying earlier, there are still 700 kilogram per square meter data centers in South Bombay, like in Fort, standing and serving workloads today, right? And I've seen them. So the 1500 kilogram per square meter data center with air cool is not going anywhere. It's just that if you're building a brand new data center now, you have to build for liquid cooling. Not solely for liquid cooling, but if you're not building for liquid cooling capability, you are being irresponsible.
Yeah, I'll just add one thing. I think that's a great answer. I think when we look at that fleet of assets, we have 325 data centers. We're not going to next week abandon 325 data centers and move everything into liquid cool. By the same token, the industry is not going to transform as fast as the hype. So today, liquid cooling is for the very top end of niche GPUs. It's probably 2 or 3% of our infrastructure fleet. Next year that might be 5%, the year after it might be 7%. There's going to be a gradual trickling down of that technology, and at some point it will make sense just for our general compute to adopt liquid cooling and head in that direction. But that's many years away, and even after that we'll still be manufacturing SKUs to go into our air-cooled data centers. And I actually think there's a whole industry that's going to stand up around retrofitting data centers so that they can continue to be used for the next 10, 20 years. And we have sidecar technology, we have all sorts of things that will come in to assist that. And I actually think this industry here will innovate. There's a lot of focus in new capital, into new builds, but at some point there's capacity issues that we focus on capital into retrofitting existing builds as well.
I believe it's actually impractical. It's not that easy because, as you rightly said, from the loading factor perspective, it's difficult to change. So we are trying one of them. So let me give you a little idea. A 7th-floor data center, we can't do liquid fitting on the top. So we're trying to now move all the racks from the ground floor and retrofit onto the ground floor because you need 3,000 kgs and that can't be there. We're trying to put that on the ground floor. So that's one way of doing it. But I don't think it's that easy. You may do from equipment perspective, but civil itself is not prepared for it unless you do something very disruptive to support it.
Thank you. I think in the interest of time, we have to wrap up. It was a very engaging discussion. Please join me in giving a big round of applause to our wonderful speakers. Thank you. Thank you. I think it's a question about that.
Ladies and